few weeks ago, we began a series, a very extensive series on the subject of providence. We've looked so far at the subject of providence, defined what providence is, and gave some examples of it. We also looked at a study of general providence, and we discussed that at some length. We also studied special providence, and we gave some examples of that. And then we began to look at some individual folks that give us some insight in how God's providence worked. We looked at the story of Queen Esther in the book of Esther. We looked at the life of Joseph, son of Abraham, the son of Jacob, in Genesis 37 through 50, and made some connections with providence. And then we finished up last week looking at the subject of the Apostle Paul. And we dealt especially with his voyage to Rome and how through God's providence that he was able to go to Rome, stand before people in authority, and be there for a lengthy period of time and be able to preach the gospel, even though he was sent there incarcerated as a prisoner. Through God's providence, he was able to work and have much success in Rome. That leads us to our lesson for today and for next week. Of course, whenever we talk about providence and whenever we talk about God, the person who is always trying to find a loophole out or trying to reject the concept of God or a supreme being or the all-powerful God and the subject of his providence, the subject of evil always comes up. And the evil that is in the world and the ungodliness that is in the world, and all of these supposedly to the distractors and to the unbelievers and to those who reject God, like an atheist or an agnostic, they believe that the problem of evil is an answer to why that there is no God, because of evil. And so today and next week, we want to talk about the providence of God and the problem of evil. How do those two things coexist? How does God's providence and yet evil that exists in our society and in our world, and we are subject to it, it's all around us, how does God's providence interact or doesn't interact at all, or does it correlate or relate to God's providence in the area of evil? There is evil. Here we have a picture on the screen of 9/11, something that we're all very familiar with. We'll all remember where we were on September the 11th in 2001. We'll always remember where we were. We'll always remember that horrific scene of the towers that came down when evil men and men that were brainwashed by an ideology that they call a religion that compelled them and convinced them to not only kill themselves, but to kill innocent women, children, and human beings in the demand of what they believed in their religion and their God. Again, that was a horrific day, and almost 3,000 people lost their lives, and the effects of that still affect us to this day. It was a very horrific thing. We also see the Twin Towers, as we remember, the planes going in and then coming down one by one. We remember the Oklahoma City bombing, and 168 people lost their lives, and many children lost their lives in that bombing by Timothy McVeigh. And again, he was put to death and was found guilty of that act, but yet that evil still permeated and affected our society. And then you have things that happen when great catastrophes happen in the world. In the last few years, we've had ISIS, who's caused a lot of mayhem throughout the world, the beheading of Christians, beheading of political prisoners that they get. In Syria, you have the Assad, who's trying to go through the Syrian people, and he's doing really, and he's just going through and he's executing those who are opposed to him and cleansing, and ethnic cleansing as he calls it. And again, all this mayhem and evil go throughout all the world. And so we are beset by this evil over and over and over again. We have evil that affects us as a country, even some of us as individuals, and society. And we have wars that are being fought in different continents and different places, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in different places around the globe where there is conflict, where there are men who are evil and men that are bent on doing destruction and harming and killing, and all of it doing in face of an ideology or a false premise in order to further their agenda. Yes, evil is all around us. And those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And we've had many examples of great evil. Hitler in World War II that exterminated 6 million Jews. We have men like Saddam Hussein, Idi Amin, Osama bin Laden. I mean, there have been men through the centuries, Stalin. There have been men through the centuries that have appropriated and proposed and orchestrated evil in mass endeavors in order to bring death and mayhem and heartache to millions and millions of people. Yes, it exists, and it's here, and there's no way to get around it. So how do you reconcile those facts with the fact of an all-powerful, merciful, and a loving God? Emotions overcome family members in Montour High School with Junior Brandon Nursey Cirilli as they head to his funeral services at Vladimir Ukrainian Orthodox Church in February 6, 2001. Cirilli and his teammate Brian Finnegan were killed on the way home from a basketball game. Yes, heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching, families crushed by the loss of young life. Yes, evil does exist. It's real. There's no getting around it. And it causes a lot of heartache in our society. The funeral of teacher David Sanders, killed at Combine High School on a massacre on April the 20th, 1999, where 2 young men took the lives of numerous students. And again, made pipe bombs and went in and killed people at random. And even asked some if they believed in God and then sent them to their Maker. Again, they were killed in the onslaught. But again, look at all the grief, look at the heartache, look at the evil that brought into our society and the homes and the lives that were destroyed. Excuse me. Why does it happen? How does it happen? Why does it happen in our society? Why do we have to deal with such adversity? The makeshift memorial in front of the Combine High School following the killing of 12 students and 1 teacher by 2 fellow students in April of '99. We all remember that. Look at all the evil, look at the heartache and the lives and the families that were touched by that. And even those who did not die, the effects of it had upon them because they experienced it. Well, what are we going to say about evil? It exists. It's real. We're affected by it. Our society is affected by it. The world's affected by it. Well, what's the answer? Is an all-powerful, all-knowing, merciful, loving, and just God? Is he unconcerned? Does he just not get involved? Does he just overlook it? And if so, why does he do that? And if not, then how do we reconcile and how do we put providence in this picture when we're dealing with such evil? First of all, God has sovereign control over nature and over history. I must apologize this morning for these interruptions. When you use electronics, there's things that come up that you have no control over, virus controls and such like. I'm sorry, we try to take care of all that, but it doesn't always work. And so, getting back to our subject, that God is in sovereign control over nature and history. God is the one that sits on the throne, and God is the supreme person in control, not nations, not people, not presidents, not prime ministers, not country, not the evil men that live in our society. They're not in control. God is in control, and He has supreme sovereignty in all things. He's infallible. He works out His purposes. He is infallible in working out His purpose for this world, for mankind, and for His will. Now, we may not understand it all. We may not know how it all comes together, but we know that God has a will. He has a purpose. And He's infallible in all the things that He does. Well, does that mean that He sends this mayhem and this evil into our world? Does it mean that He is behind it, or that He overlooks it, or that He's pleased with it, or that He just doesn't have power over it? What's the answer to that? Well, He permits or He prevents. Can He prevent it? Sure, He could prevent it. Could He prevent the planes from going into the tower? Sure, God has the ability to prevent that. But He allows certain things. Why? Because man has free moral agency. Man as a free moral agent can choose to do evil. He can choose to bring evil upon society. He can choose to do evil upon other innocent people. He can bring heartache to his own family. He can bring suffering to many. Yes, He has the ability to do that. Why? Because He's a free moral agent. That doesn't mean God likes it. That's not the way God designed it. That's not what God wants. But if men choose to do that, they have free will in order to carry that out. He provides and protects. He does provide and protect for His children. There are things that He does and can do in order to protect us and provide for us. That being said, does that mean that no evil can happen to God's people? So does that mean that all the evil that happens in the world, they don't happen to people who are associated with God? They don't happen to Christians. It don't happen to people who are in the family of God. Well, that's false. That's false. There's many people who have been touched by tragedy that are believers in God, that are Christians. And so there's people at ISIS have put to death who were Christians and were beheaded. So, yes, evil even happens to them. It can happen to us. And so there's no protective bubble on us that we can't be touched and we can't be affected by the evil that men perpetrate in the world. Yes, it can happen to us. But He does provide its protection to some degree. But He also provides us the understanding that these things, even though they can harm us, they can physically kill us, the greatest thing that we have going for us and the greatest hope that we have, the world and evil and all the atrocity done in the world, can't touch it. And that's the promises that God has made to those who love Him. God's attributes make such providence possible. Yes, His providence makes His power unlimited, yet He is selective, and His power is used, but never in a way to intervene with man's free moral agency. This is one of the things that we have to get our mind around, that there is no time in history, nor will there be, that God will intervene to destroy or take away man's free will. So if man chooses to do evil, if he chooses to cause mayhem, if he chooses to take life without regard to life, if he chooses to bring mass suffering upon people in society, he has the ability to do that. That doesn't mean God approves of it. It doesn't mean that that's what God wanted. But when men have free agency and free moral agency, they can choose, even when that choice is not even good for them, but it's not even good for society. But God's attributes help us understand that His providence is something that's real, but it also lives in a world with free moral choice. And so those two things abide at the same time. Now, sour note, the problem of evil. Yes, we serve a loving, compassionate, gracious, merciful, and long-suffering God. All that's true. He is all-powerful. There's no nation, there's no group of nations, there's no group of men on this earth that has the power that God has. And there's none that have the compassion that he has, and none that have the love and the depth of love that he has. All that's true, and all that can be clearly defined and explained and given and seen in reading of God's Word. Yet, what about evil? Does it exist even with all that ability and power and love and mercy and grace? The problem of evil is still true. How do we account for so much wickedness and evil in the world? The moral evil, the natural calamities, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, floods. Those things happen. A lot of, it's kind of interesting, a lot of those things are called acts of God, and simply they're not acts of God, they're natural calamities. They happen. They happen in various times, and sometimes they come in waves. But those things exist. We have moral evil. We have natural calamity. Those things exist. It affects the world. It affects people. And it brings a lot of pain and heartache to God's creation. Why do men, all for the innocent, more than the guilty, suffer? He's like a drunk. He gets behind the wheel of a car, and he's had too much to drink, and he crosses the center line, hits somebody head on that has done nothing wrong, that's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They're killed instantly, but he walks away without a scratch. Now, how do you explain that? How is that right? How is that morally right? How does a loving, compassionate, and merciful, all-powerful God, how does he let that happen? Again, God didn't let that happen or not happen. That happened because of the choice of an individual, and he used bad judgment, and he made bad choices, therefore there were bad results. God didn't have anything to do with that. And yet, we want to blame, we don't want to give God any credit for the good, but whenever there's bad, we want to blame him. And that's just not fair. Again, that happened because of poor choices made by God's creation. The atheist sees on suffering and evil to attempt to prove that there's no God. Well, see, there is no God. If there was a God and he was loving and powerful, and he could see the future, he knows what can happen before it happens, he knows the beginning from end, then why does he let all these things occur? Why didn't he stop those planes from flying in the towers? Why didn't he stop Combine? Why didn't he stop Sandy Hook? Why didn't he stop the young man that went into the theater in Denver and killed all? Why didn't he stop that? He knew it was going to happen. Why didn't he stop it? Well, again, those are questions that always raise their head whenever evil permeates our society and causes great suffering and death and tragedy. And yet they're fair questions, but again, you must understand that God has limited himself in how much he is going to get involved in the human race after he created it, and after he created the world. There is only so much that God's going to do, and he's going to intervene himself, but he's never going to intervene himself in a way that forces the issue and takes away the freedom of choice to his creation. God's and the existence of evil. We must reconcile the existence of evil with an all-powerful, merciful, and loving God. We've got to be able to reconcile that. We've got to be able to get our minds that both can exist simultaneously. Both can exist, and neither the evil in the world diminishes the love, the power, the mercy, the grace, and the long-suffering of God. It doesn't do that. It can only do that if we allow it to do that. It can only do that if we begin to doubt in our faith, and we begin to doubt what the Scriptures teach and what God's Word says. That's when the problem comes in. But those things do exist simultaneously, and they are not a paradox. They can be explained why both exist and why both must be dealt with. Only good things should happen to the elect and evil to the non-elect. That's the way human reasoning is. Well, if I'm good, and if I'm a believer in God, and if I'm faithful, then everything good is going to happen to me. And if I'm evil, and I'm unkind, and I perpetrate evil, and I do evil things, then evil things are going to happen. Well, Observance and experience tells us that's just not true. We see good, moral, upright, good people who are Christians, who are seeking to do the right thing, trying to follow God, and yet their lives are touched by evil and tragedy. And then we see people who are evil and ungodly and perpetrate a lot of mayhem and grief and tragedy upon others, and yet they continue to live. So how do we get our minds around those two facts? And are they both happening, and can we reconcile that with the God that we serve and this existence of evil with the providence of God? What occurs when experience tells us good and bad happen to both? It does happen to both. Experience tells us that, and observation tells us that. Good people suffer bad things. Bad people sometimes don't suffer any bad things. It happens that way. Do I understand it? Not completely. Can I explain it? Yes, I think I can explain it. But again, those two things do exist and are real. Does one counteract and does it diminish the other? Does the problem of evil mean that God is not as loving, not as merciful, not as gracious, not as loving, and not as powerful as he claims to be? Such thinking is false and has misunderstood the providence of God, the power of God, how it's used and what it's for, and free moral agency. But when you get those things confused, you're going to reach wrong conclusions, and that's what many people do. Many lose their faith in time of adversity, heartache, and tragedy. When a young person loses their life in a great tragedy, or if somehow they get struck down with cancer very early in life, or some other hideous disease, and they die, and parents or the family, they pray and pray and pray that God would help them and would spare their life, and they're not spared, they get angry. And what do they do? Well, they blame God. They turn and blame God, and many of them lose their faith because they believe, well, if he's so powerful and so merciful, then these things wouldn't happen. But again, they do happen. Let's, for the few moments we have left, I'm going to read some passages from Psalms chapter 73. And we're going to read some verses here, and then we're going to make some comments, and then we'll pick this up next Lord's Day. Psalm 73 begins, "Truly God is good to Israel, to such as are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled. My steps had nearly slipped. For I was envious of the boastful when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. For there are no pangs in their death, but their strength is firm. They are not in trouble as other men, nor are they plagued like other men. Therefore pride serves as their necklace, violence covers them like a garment, their eyes bulge with abundance, they have more than the heart could wish. They scoff and speak wickedly concerning oppression, they speak loftily, they set their mouth against the heavens, and their tongue walk through the earth. Therefore his people return here, and waters of a full cup are drained by them. And they say, how does God know? And is there knowledge of the Most High? Behold, these are ungodly, who are always at ease. They increased in riches. Surely I have cleansed my heart in vain, washed my hands in innocence. For all day long I have plagued and chastened every morning. If I had said, I will speak thus, behold, I would have been untrue to the generation of your children. When I thought how to understand this, it was too painful to me, until I went unto the sanctuary of the house of God. Then I understood their end." Now notice in this list, it says something that we all know is very true, that it seems that evil men, they prosper. They're not troubled as other men. They're not plagued like other men. And they wear violence like a garment. They have abundance, even more than they need. And they scoff and they speak wickedly against God, and yet they continue to live and distraught and to prosper, and it seems no evil comes to them. And the psalmist, he's thinking about that by observation and by experience, that he's seen all that. How does he reconcile that with a loving and merciful God? Well, the key is the last verse. Let me read that last verse again. When I thought how to understand this, it was too painful to me until I went into the sanctuary of God. Then I understood therein. What does he mean that he went into the sanctuary of God and then he understood their end? Well, ladies and gentlemen, what that simply means, when he went into God's Word and he studied it and he meditated upon it and he read it and he understood it, he understands that men really get away with nothing. Yes, they can perpetrate evil. They can bring heartache and misery to families. They can cause death. They can cause a lot of evil that they can purport upon others. But in the final analysis, they did that by their free choice that God gave them. They used it unwisely. They used it selfishly. And they used it to harm others, which man has the ability to do. Yet in the end, they did not escape a reckoning with God. They're going to have to give an account for what they did. They're going to have to pay the consequences of those decisions. And just because they're not paid now, and just because the heartache that was put out on others is not stopped, does not mean they got away with it. It does not mean everything is well with them. It does not mean that they got away with anything. It just means that judgment and reckoning comes later. And for that, we're going to have to be thankful, and we're going to have to be patient, that God will balance the scales. He'll make it all come out right. And the unjust, the ungodly, and those evil men, they will pay for their crimes and for the things that they brought upon society. We just have to trust God and let God take care of it. That's very difficult for us to do. We want instantaneous judgment. We want God to do something right now, or we want God to prevent some pain or agony in our lives. It just doesn't happen that way. And we have to accept that, and we have to go on.